Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
And today our speaker is Larry Yang, whom a lot of us know. Larry is a Spirit Rock community Dharma leader and leads meditation retreats tailored for men, people of color, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender communities, and people in recovery from addiction. He co-leads a meditation group at the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Center in San Francisco. And he is a member of Jack Kornfield's teacher training program. He's back from Thailand for about a year, and I'll turn the meeting over to him.
So thanks for inviting me back. I don't think I've been here since I've returned from Thailand, so I look a little different. I used to have hair down to here, and one of my dyke friends asked, "When did you go butch?" And I said, "I don't know." It was always there. Before I begin, I just really want to acknowledge the passing of a friend of the Sangha, Roger Corliss. And I didn't personally know Roger very well, but I didn't need to, because the impact that he had on this particular Sangha, but also the practice of LGBTs in general, and also just the Dharma in the West, is very apparent. And I felt that even though I didn't know him very well, as my practice deepened in terms of him languaging the Dharma in ways that I could access. So I just wanted to acknowledge, and I know that Jim is saying that there'll be a service or a memorial or a session for him next week. Could you ring the bell 3 times? Just usually, during a transition or a passing, one of the rituals is to ring the bell 108 times, basically the 108 blessings, and we don't exactly have time for that, but it also reduces down to the 3 refuges. So could you just... It's said that when the bell rings, it reverberates and is heard through all of the levels of our experience, all of the heaven realms and the hell realms. So, and in all of the practice venues in our current world. So, may Roger still be connected with us through that sound wherever he is. And so, what I'd like to talk about today is a little bit influenced by his passing. And I didn't know what I was going to call it, but when I was sitting just now, the title that comes up for me is "Water Off a Duck's Back," the practice of letting go. And so when I was in Thailand, there are many different lineages even within Thailand. There's many of you know that there's the Theravadan sect and Mahayana and the Tibetan Vajrayana. But even within the Southeast Asian culture, the Theravadan culture, there are many different forms of practice. And so one of the very famous meditation masters of the 20th century, Ajahn Chah, has this very famous quote. He says, if you let go a little, you have a little bit of freedom. If you let go a lot, you have a lot of freedom. If you let go completely, you have complete freedom. And that's what our practice is about, is this exploration, this experimentation of what is freedom, and therefore what is the path towards. And this guiding of what is this letting go that will facilitate this opening that we might have. Because we actually know what it is not to let go, right? This stickiness, this attachment, this clinging to things. This is the first and second noble truth, that there is suffering and there's a cause of suffering, which is this attachment, this clinging, this and as you sit and maybe contemplate for yourself, what is it that is in your life that you tend to hold on to? I mean, basic stuff like how we look. Like, I didn't come here in my pajamas. I thought about it, and it mattered to me what I looked like when I came into this space. Or what gives you comfort? I know that when I moved to San Francisco in the late 80s, it took me almost 4 years to feel as if this was home, or that I felt comfortable, or that I had nested somewhere. What is that? I mean, am I attached to it? Which I am, because things are comfortable now. And when I went to Thailand, I had to basically give all of that up, including things I never expected to give up, like opening your mouth when you're taking a shower. Because you just can't. You'll get, the water, the hygiene in the water is just not acceptable to do that. And so all of these things that we take for granted that give us comfort. We have this term comfort food. And there's some attachment there around our level of comfort and our relationships. For those of you, whether you're in a primary intimate relationship or not, there can be that wanting and that wondering of that taking for granted that the attachment is this place of freedom. And one of the things that I actually had to explore when I in my own relationship is was it like to give it up in order to pursue my practice. So I had to create a situation with my partner that it was okay to basically give up that relationship for 6 months, which wasn't just a conversation over dinner one night. It actually took about 3 years. And but having that intention of exploring what is it like not to be with each other and still to be with each other. To explore what it's like not to have each other, because at some point in time we won't have each other. So one of the things that supports this whole exploration of letting go, I don't like the word renunciation. It has a lot of sort of other connotations from different spiritual traditions to it. But that's actually the traditional translation of the word nakama. But I prefer letting go, or giving it up, or giving up something. Part of what is said that helps this exploration of letting go is exploring the ending of things. So in the Theravadan practice, the focus is around awareness and mindfulness, and this is not necessarily true for some of the other lineages, but in the mindfulness practice, you watch the breath. You watch the physical sensations that arise. And one of the instructions is to watch the ending of things. So how does the breath end? And notice that you actually can't have the experience of holding on to the breath. How, if your knee is aching from sitting, that as you explore deeper and deeper into those physical sensations actually don't stay. They are constantly in change. How does that have anything to do with how we live our life? So, Stephen and I went on this vacation a couple of years ago to Paris, and I had never been, and it was one of, up until that point, it was one of the highlights vacations that I had ever been on. It was one of those experiences that each day got better and better. Everything fell into place, all the travel arrangements, we met great people, the food was fabulous. And we knew it was going to end. It was just 2 weeks. We both had to get back to our jobs, and yet each day was getting better and better. And then there was this bittersweet quality of knowing, of being aware that it was going to end. And you actually can't separate the sweetness from the bitterness. And so, as the last days of the vacation were happening, it was almost laughable in terms of, do we not have a good time because it's going to end? No, you live as fully as you can, being aware that it is going to end, and to notice. How is that for you? How was that for us? There's, at least in my generation, there was, the Peanuts comic books and Linus with his security blanket. And this, however many years that Charles Schulz drew that comic strip, was how many years that Linus was totally attached to this security blanket. And, in therapeutic terms, it's viewed as a transitional object, right? Well, for Linus, it was a permanent object. But what is the purpose of this transitional, in terms of psychological terms? We have these transitional objects, and I had mine. I had a pillow that followed me for a while. We have these transitional objects to self-soothe anxiety. We begin to, if we're not getting the soothing from other sources in our childhood, we project that onto these objects that hold that for us for that time being, and then we change and grow, and those objects begin to fall away. In actuality, everything in our life is a transitional object. And we often project our desire to soothe our anxiety onto those objects, whether they're objects or people or places that we live. And just having that additional spaciousness that all of these objects are transitional gives us a little bit more equanimity when they do change. As I was saying earlier about my relationship with Stephen, one of the things that I still hold is when it was brought to our attention that all relationships end in one of two ways: separation or death. There is no other option. And so when we first got together, I had this, habit, or I don't know. I used to rub his head because I just liked the texture of it. I just liked the feeling of it. And it was just a gesture of affection that, until one day he said, I want you to do that if you're around and I'm passing or dying. That's what I would like to feel at that moment. And his request around that has changed my experience of that gesture. So whenever I do that, I actually think of that moment. I actually let that moment come into my consciousness and see what that feels like. Sometimes I don't feel that connected with that moment, and sometimes there are some really strong feelings that come up. So whenever I go on retreat, whether it's a week or even when I went to ordain, especially it came up when I went to ordain in Thailand for 6 months, because I was going into this community that demanded celibacy, it demanded silence, it demanded adherence to 227 precepts, and usually we only talk about 5. And a lot can happen in 6 months. So there was that possibility, for whatever reason, that I would either not come back, or come back and not have a relationship, or, we just don't know what would happen. And so part of that was sitting with that possibility of having to let go of something that has been such an integral part of my life for the last 7 or 8 years. And I don't say these things in terms of even suggesting that this is what people should do. That's really not my purpose in sort of describing where I've been exploring. It's really just sharing how I've explored these teachings, and for each of us it will look different. How do we explore this concept of being content with things as they are, as opposed to wanting more? And the most important thing is not what you do to explore it, but that you do explore it. That it is this incremental practice that deepens our experience. So the other area that has been really sort of not something that I intended to explore was this area of livelihood and profession and role. What do I do? Hello, my name's Larry. What do you do? And the first time this came up in my life was not out of choice, really. It was, I was basically working in marketing and advertising for a long period of time, and maybe 15 or 17 years. And I personally, my life crashed. I was involved in a lot of drugs and alcohol, and when I went into recovery from those particular addictions, I realized that what I was doing to feed those addictions was part of the addictive process, part of the workaholism, the the inability to, again, be with anxiety or difficult feelings, and this emptiness that I had inside that I was constantly filling with external measures of how good I looked or what I did. And so what I realized I had to do was in order to begin the healing process around the addictive mind, is to let go of what I was doing in terms of livelihood. And so that was a choice based on, even though the choice to give up a livelihood didn't feel right, and it felt insecure and fear, and the choice was what was going to lead to less suffering. And both paths seemed painful, but which path was going to lead to less suffering, not knowing what the outcome might be. And so, then, so I was in bed for 6 months, totally depressed, and, whatever I was doing. And in that recovery, sort of becoming a substance abuse counselor and sort of going back to school and becoming a social worker and recreating a profession that didn't feed into those particular addictive patterns. As my meditation practice deepened, things changed again. And I found that the jobs that I was holding wouldn't allow me to go into these 2 or 3 month retreats that I was really beginning to feel the draw for. And so the falling away began happening again. So I actually had to give up jobs in order to continue the practice that I saw myself being led towards. And again, that happened right before I went to Thailand, that the place that I was working at wouldn't give me a sabbatical or a time off. And I found that the decision to let these things go was so much more easier now than it was 20 years ago when that first act of giving up occurred. So it has become easier over time that as I've stayed with that moment of letting go and just watching what are the situations that will create this ability to let things fall away. This is by a Brazilian author. He's actually talking about a prostitute and her relationship to her work. But it's actually, I thought, a beautiful statement around letting go of this particular activity that we go through, that we have this role or work activity in our life. She looked around her. People were walking around, heads down, hurrying off to work, to school, to the employment agency, telling themselves, I can wait a little longer. I have a dream, but there's no need to realize it today. Besides, I need to earn some money. Of course, everybody spoke ill of her profession, but basically it was all a question of selling her time like everyone else, doing things she didn't want to do like everyone else, putting up with horrible people like everyone else, handing over her precious body and her precious soul in the name of a future that never arrived like everybody else, saying that she didn't have enough like everyone else, waiting just a little bit longer like everyone else, waiting so that she could earn just a little bit more, postponing the realizing of her dreams. She was just too busy right now. She had a great opportunity ahead of her, loyal clients who were waiting for her, who could pay. And for the first time in her life, despite all the good things she could buy with her money, who knows, she might have only had to work another year. she decided consciously, lucidly, and deliberately to let an opportunity pass by her. That letting that opportunity go can only happen with mindfulness, consciously and deliberately. Renunciation is a choice. The intention of renunciation is a choice, but the act can never be forced, because you know that, like, when you try to force yourself to repress or to give something up, it actually, the energy comes back magnified. So there are many conditions that support this aspect of letting go. And some of these can be framed, at least within Buddhist language, as around the paramis, around the perfections, around developing equanimity and loving kindness and patience and determination and generosity. All of these factors support the practice of letting go, and that's why we work on all of these different practices. And when these perfections sort of become stronger, when the awareness and the mindfulness become stronger, we're able just to be with that moment for what it is. So that when we're with mindfulness, the act of renunciation isn't throwing it away, but it's falling away. And that's where the title of the talk came from. It's water off a duck's back. It's not about that. It's not even about this. It's because this, the mind is still curled around the moment. So as we uncurl the mind, it just naturally falls away. It's an organic process. So not necessarily to force the act, but the effort is in the intention. And from that sort of organic falling away, there is what they call effortless effort, that you're in the flow, that life is this stream that is flowing past us. And as we uncurl the mind, we just allow the life to flow through us. Sort of an expression of emptiness. This flow of life sometimes is called, the image is a rope that is just being pulled. And what happens when we hold on to it? We get rope burn. So the instruction is to let go. And Rumi says, be like melting snow, wash yourself of yourself. So, I'll give you another vacation story that just happened over New Year's. So we went on a cruise to the west coast of Mexico, and we've both been on sort of gay cruises, and we actually went on a mainstream cruise with my parents for their 65th anniversary a couple of years ago, and we had a really great time. So we decided to go on this cruise that wasn't particularly gay. And it was one of the most homophobic experiences I've had in a really long time. So this is a huge contrast to Paris, right? That on the second day, someone sort of calls us a faggot on the boat, and then so I'm pretty energized around these issues. I've been working in sort of multicultural issues for a long time, so I immediately engaged with the staff. And, I tell them that I had read on these Carnival cruise lines, since the year 2000, 12 people have fallen overboard, 2 of which the bodies were recovered, 2 of which survived, and 8 of which never were found. And so there was this immediate connection of safety for me when a verbal threat is said to us. So, they said they couldn't, control their passengers' behavior, which is true. And the dinner table was uncomfortable with the 3 other couples, and we ended up going to a private dining area to have our meals. And then it got progressively more interesting. Stephen got an invitation, because he's been on these cruises before, to a reception. And so he called to ask if I could attend with him as his partner. And the answer was no, because it was for only returnees. And so I said, I wonder if you were to say, can you bring your wife? Could they come? And so he called back. And sure enough, his wife could go. So the last thing that I'll say in terms of these escalating events, at least they were escalating for us, because this kind of experience is cumulative, right? The basically these mini traumas are cumulative. Was on the last day, this is after I had engaged with the staff, the cruise director has a disembarkation talk. How you get off the ship, what you do with your customs. And he said, well, for those of you returning to the mainland of the U.S., you know that fruits and nuts are not allowed back onto the mainland, so I guess some of you will be staying with us. He said this to 2,600 people. And on a boat, you have nowhere to go. You have nothing to do. And this is exactly what a retreat is like. Nowhere to go and nothing to do, except to be with the experience. Noticing what was arising. And so, I want to talk about 2 things about that mindfulness arising for this particular situation. One is around traumatic conditioning, in terms of what I was talking about, this cumulative experience of injury that can trigger old stuff, but also accumulates in the moment. And as we go through it, the more that we're able to be mindful of the physical sensations, the emotional reactions, the thoughts that are arising, we actually go through the experience as opposed to be around it. Because the definition of trauma is the re-experiencing of an intrusive event over and over again. But when we go through it, it falls away. It becomes something else. So in that moment, I said that my response was to engage with the staff. The most painful experience of this particular thing for me was that Stephen's experience was to go inward. So the hardest thing for me was to see the depression. And at some point for me, there was a choice. I could externalize the anger, or I could love the depression. And neither were very comfortable experiences. They're unpleasant. But for me, the choice was what was going to lead to less suffering. And so I chose to love the depression in the sense of just being there for that. And the anger began to transform. So when we got to Vallarta, Puerto Vallarta, there's a huge gay, it's a huge gay hangout now, and I didn't know this, and so we immediately went there, and it was a respite, it was a refuge, but there was enough spaciousness because of my experience on the ship and just making that choice. There was something that I saw around, here are these brothers and sisters having a fabulous time. And really, that's all the people on the boat wanted to do too. We were basically doing the exact same thing. It's just that in this moment we can't do it together. For whatever the reasons are. Whatever the conditions of that. But that sense of common experience helped me get through the difficulty. And so, we wrote the letters that we needed to after the experience. But in a sense, I don't feel traumatized by the event. It's what it is. And it's not as if I won't ever go on another cruise. And all of this talk about letting go, the reason that it was sort of influenced by Roger is that all of this is a practice for the big let go that all of us will be doing. That moment that we have to let everything go. And so the practice incrementally around Dharma could be viewed as, how do we die well? How do we make that passing, that last moment, with ease? I was talking with my friend Tim, who knew Roger much better than I, and spent a day the week before he passed. And the one thing that I'll share that Tim shared with me was that Roger had this relaxation around his passing. And that was very important for Roger's experience. But it was critical for Tim's experience because it allowed Tim to relax. And there was loss, but not the trauma of grief. And so Tim feels, I think he would be okay with me sharing that. Tim feels sad, but not, it's different than an unresolved grief. Each person who goes through that experience is a teacher. My father's 90, and I'm watching him totally was interested in the world, CNN, politics, and now his focus is on the garden. It's just beginning to narrow. And his greatest teaching that's coming up for me is how he begins to let go. And I'm trying to be as mindful about it as possible. And so the question you might ask is, isn't this depressing? So the Canadian musician Jan Arden says, to not think about dying is to not think about living. And when that question comes up, doesn't this sound depressing? I'll just share one last story about Mahasi Sayadaw, who's this Burmese master, supposedly, enlightened in this lifetime. Basically, re-infused the awareness practice so that it has been able to be taught in the West. And he died in 1984, and some of you may have heard this story before, but one day, his aura, once you walk into the room, you can feel his presence, his awareness, that he was aware of just whatever it was in the moment that was happening. And he was finishing a retreat, and he turns to one of his assistants saying, "That's a new sensation." And he was having a massive coronary. And he died the next day. So he was meeting that moment with so much ease. I actually find that to be inspiring and not depressing. To be able to meet that letting go with that equanimity, with that peacefulness, that non-resistance. And it's not it's not about being perfect, right? So I started with an Ajahn Chah quote, so I'll end with one. Even though we can't let go, we are aware of these states continuously. Being continuously aware of ourselves and our attachments, we come to see that grasping is just not the path. We know, but we can't let go. But that's 50%. Though we can't let go, we do understand that the letting go of these things will bring peace. So what he's saying is that the more we cultivate the mindfulness to be aware that we have a choice of letting go, that just that intention is 50% of the way to freedom. Let go of the past, let go of the future, and let go of what is in between, transcending things of time. With your mind free in every direction, you will not return to birth and aging, which is to say freedom. That's from the Dhammapada. So thank you for your attention. And we have some time, just to open up to any comments or discussion, and I know that it might be also a switch of a subject, but I also wanted to offer the opportunity if people wanted to talk about the future of the LGBT retreats at Spirit Rock, because I know that that's been going on as an issue too within the larger queer community. So please.
As I'm listening to what you say, I spent an enormous amount of time with people dying. And then, like many of us here, I had the privilege of spending 3 years with my 6 closest friends as they got ill. And they all died, and I was there. And one of the earliest and most challenging experiences for me was when I was with my mother. Mm-hmm. And she was dying, and I didn't know it. But she was profoundly, I was much younger. She had us when she was 45, so, she died when I was relatively young. And I was present for a whole week with her. I had no idea that it would be the last time I would see her. And she was letting go of something that was extremely core in my life, which was she was letting go of me and of her love and attachment. And my father had already died, and I was sleeping in my father's bed. And every time she'd go to the bathroom, I would burst into these intense tears because it was painful. And in a way, in my mind, in my life, it wasn't a letting the go, but what it was the beginning of a being present. So it was like a process, and this was the very first time that I got to experience what it was like to fully open up to something I could not control, I did not want, and there was no other recourse than just being present. And it seems almost paradoxical that the beginning of letting go is the recognition of how difficult, how challenging, and in a way, in the beginning, how it appeared to me impossible. But it was being present with that opened up, as one moment opens up to the next, the possibilities.
Thanks. And I think that, what you're describing beautifully says what I was trying to say in the sense of not having any place to go and nothing else to do. You had no choice. It was unfolding in front of you. And we can either resist it or let go into the moment. Yeah.
And it eventually led me to a place of understanding that for me, this word isn't used very much in Buddhism, but for me there had to be some kind of surrendering. And that's very hard to get.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for this talk, by the way. It very much deals with issues that I'm going through right now, too. It's not as intense as the death of a loved one, but I'm struggling in the sense that I have a job that is just totally, after 17 years, I have a total aversion for it. But, and I can retire right now. I can let go in that sense. I can retire right now. And, but I've set a date of 10 months from now where I accumulate more seniority in my retirement. I can be able to save more money, and yada yada. So I have this date of 10 months, and I'm not even really negotiating that. I mean, that's been my goal. But I feel like I'm serving a prison sentence, and it's really like, for instance, like this weekend right now. It was a very enjoyable, fun weekend. But I know I have to go to work tomorrow. I just feel myself just clenching with resistance about that. Yeah. So I just wonder if you could just address that. I in a way, almost kind of like trying to force myself not to resist. This is another form of resistance, or try to jolly myself out of it. It doesn't really work. But maybe you can just kind of like dialogue. I mean, like one option would be just to say, screw it, just quit right now. But again, I feel it's my long-term benefit to tough it out and then do it. But then I just have some issues about how to deal with the next 10 months until I get to the point where I move on to something else.
I don't know if I can give you any advice on your situation.
I'm not even really asking for advice. I know it sounds like I'm turning into Dear Abby or something. After my
I don't have the hair anymore.
I'll get some Baltimore advice next. I just want just not my specific issue, but just the issue of having to deal with resistance in a way you're not just resisting some more.
When that situation, because I've had to recently deal with that in terms of giving up my clinical license, the struggle of whether to do that or not, because I just am not drawn to that work anymore. And part of the resistance for me is the fear of the unknown of what, it's the wanting the security of that material, accruement, and the fear that I won't be taken care of if I don't take care of myself, or that things won't be enough. And so really just to sit with the resistance and see if that resistance is giving some message to you around that could influence your decision. Because what we think we need is exactly that. It's a thought. It's not how our life is exactly unfolding. So at the moment, I don't know if I will be able to sort of make my expenses, given the fact that I've given up this level of professional, activity. And I'm just sitting with that uncertainty, as opposed to sitting with the resistance. It's a little bit different. It actually is a little bit easier for me.
To sit with the uncertainty rather than the resistance?
Yes. Yes. When I went to Thailand, one of the things about ordaining, you have to answer these questions. But one of the questions you have to answer is, if your parents are alive, do you have their permission to ordain? And this was actually from the time of the Buddha. So 5 months before I ordained, I went to my parents and I asked them for permission, and I thought I'd gotten it. And I go over to Thailand. I start a 3-week retreat in order to sort of prepare myself for the ordination. The second day of the retreat, I get a call from Stephen saying, "You better talk to your mother." Because she doesn't think that she gave you permission. And I'm thinking passive aggressive, and so in the span of a couple of hours, I was working with letting go of ordaining, and just after this 3 or 4 year period of preparation, letting go of that, because I wasn't going to go against. If I was going to do it, I was going to do it the way that it's been done. I didn't want to circumvent it. And so for a period of time, I didn't know whether I was going to ordain or not. And was it okay just to have that be? Really uncertain. And eventually it worked out that I did. But every day of that 6 months was like that. Uncertain. When you walk for your food every day, you can't keep food, you can't cook food, you can't buy food as a monastic. You walk for your food every morning. Are you going to get enough? What is enough? If you don't have enough, you're not going to die for one day. You'll get enough the next day. So that's why I say that the practice around uncertainty is this incremental practice, that from these small moments I've been able to actually take larger leaps of faith that I'll get taken care of.
Don't you think letting go can go to an extreme though? I mean, for example, if you decide to have a child,
Yes.
you have a certain responsibility.
Yes.
And you can't just decide one day that you don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
So it's sort of like, yes, you have your own self-interest, but you also have a certain response. And I think that extends also to the kind of work you do, or I do. It's like there are certain parts of my job that I don't particularly like, but overall it does give me satisfaction. And I think that it's not so much, I think it's how you think about the things in your life that really affect you more than what you're actually doing.
Yes.
And I think people get into this mindset, especially in America, that somehow, we're not free unless we're not working.
Right.
And I think it's most of the world has to work until the day they die.
Right.
If they don't work, they don't eat.
Right.
And so we're kind of privileged in that sense. And I think that sometimes if we just reframe things in our minds, it would be a lot easier.
I'm totally there with you. And one of the things around the 4 foundations that is rarely taught in the West is that we think of it as an individual practice of awareness. What are your physical sensations? What are your feeling tones? What are your mental formations? And there is a distinct part of the 4 foundations, the Satipatthana Sutta, that says it's a collective experience, that there is this extension of awareness to others that you create in order to, do the skillful action. So, we don't live in a vacuum, and we do have responsibilities, and you're right, we live in a bubble in terms of what you're saying, Don.
I noticed it's 12.
This may be, sorry?
I noticed that it's 12 o'clock, and it's up to the Sangha whether we want to continue this or move to closing?
Well, there are a couple other questions, so I suggest we move to closing and then people can talk to Larry.
Will you be available
That's
for
fine.
questions after?
That's fine.
Okay.
Well, maybe.
Do we have a host?
I'm sorry. We're not going to have more questions. Sorry.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Do we have a host today?
Yes. Yeah, we have, after this, we have a small social time afterwards, and some of the things we'd like you to remember is to wash out your teacup, if you use one. And we have a Dharma bowl that we ask for $5, a minimum $5 donation, if you can. It's not mandatory. We also have a sign-up sheet by the Dharma bowl if you would like to receive a newsletter. And then some people gather to go to lunch after our little social time. So, and I bring refreshments for people.
Paul?
I have two announcements. One is that there is this matter of whether LGBT retreat will be at Spirit Rock or not. And some of you might have seen an email from Eric Colby expressing the difficulties that he and Arena Weissman had when they were there. And I just wanted to say that no matter where it goes, my first retreat was at Dominican College. It was a non-LGBT retreat. So there's a very special place in my heart there. And, in terms of this letting go business, we shouldn't be too attached to where it is because retreats are beautiful experiences wherever they are. The second thing is that I'm directing a play, and we had a theater party last month, and then in February there'll be one for my play on February 17th, which is closing night. Marvin Snow has a really nice house in the Berkeley Hills that he's offered for the closing night party for my casting company and for GBF. So I'll put it on the list for more information. But it was so much fun last time, and it really was a practice in sangha building. We don't really get to schmooze too much in the half hour after beer, and so these things are really good in sangha.
Do you want to say something about the flyers, Larry, that you brought?
Oh, I have 2 flyers out there. There's an event at Spirit Rock on the 10th, and I also wanted to invite everybody who is in the East Bay to the East Bay Meditation Center. We'll have we just opened the space yesterday. We had our opening event, and it's in downtown Oakland, right next to BART. So we'll have a monthly queer group the last Wednesday night of every month. So the next one will be January 31st. And so please come to whatever events you feel like.
Can you also do a regular meditation or something at the LGBT Center here?
I do it when I'm in town, which is Monday nights at 5:30. Thanks.
Any other?
This is talking about attachments. 3 years, Paul reminded me the other day, I've been talking about giving up responsibility for dealing with business. Say that. The time has come when the event sort of overtook me, but I was very attached to this thing, and I wasn't sure anybody else could do it as well as I would, or take care of these guys as well as I was. That's a part of it. That's another thing, I'm sure. It's like being significant in the world as an older man. Another thing. I have no hard time getting into that. So that's a preface to saying this will probably be the last time I'll be talking about it as the person saying we're going to have a meeting. We're having a meeting. Doug, I didn't get a chance to get a hold of you, but several people have come forward. I don't know why they just did it. They didn't. I would be able to still suffer. But they come forward. We're going to have a meeting event to get this thing going. And I hope that others may like to just come and see what it's going to be like, because I think it's going to be a little more of a committee structure. And I just wanted to also, I'm going to indulge you, myself, by saying, I have a wonderful letter from a man who is getting out of prison next week. Well, he wrote this, he was just getting out. No, I guess he's out already. Anyway, he once wrote an article, and we had it in the newsletter 2 years ago. You probably don't remember it, but his name is Raymond Nicolette. He's a very advanced person, he just wanted to thank you. I mean, this letter is written to the Sangha, not to any person. I want to thank you for all the beautiful Dharma and Sangha support you all have shared with me over these past many years. I look forward to participating very actively in the wider world. And he's going to be actually starting writing for some kind of journal about Buddhism. And he looks forward to joining his lover, Jason Van Zyl, who also... and so you can stop reading the newsletter so you can save more trees. So I'm very moved by this letter because I do remember this man and I had an active conversation. Well, anyway, there will be a meeting next. And I won't be again.
I just wanted to add on to that. He's been up with us for like 6 of the 16 years he was in prison.
Wow.
And there's over 200 guys on the list. And I don't know that we understand the import of that, our prison outreach. That we support hundreds of guys all over the country and a few women. And there are actually sanghas in a couple of prisons already. And we've been the catalyst for a lot of that growth. And we do get letters of people who are going out with better lives. And so I just wanted to encourage people to maybe join the committee because it's very rewarding work.
Sorry, bro.
Okay.
Yes, I just want to announce a couple of openings of positions related to GBF. One is the position of the retreat coordinator for our annual autumn retreat, and the other one is a couple of positions on the host list opened up. So if you're interested in any of the positions, please let me know. Thank you.
And I'm the potluck coordinator. If anybody would like to hold a potluck in their home, see them.
Okay. Can you lead us in a closing?
Sure.
Just taking a moment to feel how the body is right now. Noticing the contact of the circle, the warmth of your hands, the support of your Sangha brothers. If there's any appreciation that you have for your efforts and the efforts of everyone here, and whatever goodness that has been created by our practice, may it be dedicated to the freedom and the end of suffering of all beings in all worlds and all directions.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.